Have you ever asked yourself if your entire life was lived only for others? Have you ever stood in a quiet room, the echoes of memories pressing down on you, and wondered, who am I without them? Those questions haunted me. They came at night, sharp as a blade, whispering that maybe I was nothing more than the roles I had played: daughter, wife, mother, and without them, I was no one at all. My name is Julia Weston, and my story began in the heart of Fayetteville, Arkansas. I was born into an ordinary middle-class family, the kind where neighbors waved from their porches and Sundays were for family dinners. My father managed a small grocery store, his hands always smelling faintly of flour and coffee beans. My mother taught at the local elementary school. She was patient and soft-spoken, a woman who could turn even the dullest chores into lessons about life. My childhood felt warm and safe, stitched together with small joys: running barefoot through the grass with my little sister Emily, baking cookies with my mother, riding with my father in his old truck as he whistled to the radio. But underneath those happy memories was the quiet truth that nothing stays the same. At 15, I learned what change really meant. My father lost his job when the grocery store closed. Overnight, the easy rhythm of our home shifted. My mother took on extra classes to pay the bills, and I grew up fast. I learned that responsibility isn't something you choose, it's something that falls on you whether you're ready or not. I carried that sense of duty into adulthood. After college, I took a job as a secretary at a local school. It wasn't glamorous, but it gave me purpose, structure, and a paycheck. That's where I met Richard. He was calm, dependable, and carried himself with the quiet confidence of a man who knew how to work hard. We married, built a home, and raised two children. For years, I lost myself in the swirl of family life. My days were filled with permission slips, dinners on the table at 6, and late-night talks with Richard about the children's futures. I never stopped to ask myself what I wanted. It didn't matter. My family was my world, and I poured everything into them. Then, without warning, everything I had built came crashing down. Richard was 58 when he had the heart attack. One moment he was fine, laughing at something our daughter said on the phone, and the next he was gone. Just like that. The hospital room was sterile, the doctor's voices flat, and I remember standing there numb, staring at the bed where he lay, thinking, this can't be real. But it was real, and it left me with a silence I had never known before. Our children, grown and busy with their own lives, called often at first. They came home when they could, sat with me at the kitchen table where Richard's chair stood painfully empty. But life has a way of pulling everyone forward. Soon, their calls grew shorter, their visits less frequent. They had careers, partners, children of their own, and I was left with the ghost of a life I no longer recognized. The house, once full of laughter and noise, became unbearable. Every room echoed with absence. The routines that had once defined me: packing lunches, waiting for Richard's car to pull into the driveway, folding laundry for a family, vanished. In their place was emptiness. I tried to keep going. I read books. I planted flowers in the yard. I even volunteered at the library for a while. But nothing filled the hollow space inside me. The days blurred together, each one quieter than the last. Nights were the worst. I lay awake, staring into the dark, whispering questions into the silence. Is this all that's left of me? Is my life over just because there's moved on? Depression crept in quietly, like fog rolling into a valley. I stopped answering calls from friends. I avoided mirrors because the woman staring back looked like a stranger, tired, lost, forgotten. And yet, somewhere deep inside, a small voice refused to die. It asked me, what if there's more? What if you're not finished yet? I didn't know then, but that question would become the spark that pulled me back to life. Grief has a way of disguising itself. At first, It is sharp and obvious, slicing through your days with unbearable pain. But then, slowly, it turns into something quieter, something that clings to you like a heavy coat you can't take off. For months after Richard died, that coat became my second skin. I didn't notice how far I had sunk. I told myself I was managing. I got up. I cleaned the house. I paid the bills. But if someone had really looked into my eyes, they would have seen the truth. I wasn't living, I was just existing. The mornings were the worst. I would sit at the kitchen table with a cup of coffee cooling in my hands, staring at the empty chair across from me. That chair had once been Richard's spot, where he'd unfold the newspaper and mutter about the state of the world while I cooked breakfast. Now it was just a silent reminder of everything I had lost. I'd hear the echo of his voice, the scrape of his fork against the plate, but when I blinked, there was nothing but silence. My children called often at first. They checked in, their voices gentle, their concern obvious. But life has a way of moving people forward, and soon their calls became shorter, their visits less frequent. I didn't blame them. They had careers, partners, children of their own. Still, I couldn't stop the resentment that sometimes bubbled inside me. I wanted to scream at them. Don't you see me drowning? Don't you remember I'm still here? But I never said those words. Instead, I said what mothers are expected to say. I'm fine. Don't worry about me. Focus on your life. The truth was, my life had become unbearable. I stopped answering friends' invitations. I stopped attending church, too afraid of the pitying looks. I filled my evenings with mindless television, the kind of shows you forget the moment the credits roll. The house grew colder, not because the thermostat was low, but because I had let the warmth inside me die. One night, I caught sight of myself in the hallway mirror. My hair was unkempt, my face pale, eyes ringed with shadows. I didn't recognize the woman staring back. She looked like someone abandoned, forgotten even by herself. That was the moment I realized just how deep the darkness had pulled me. Still, change doesn't happen all at once. It comes in small sparks. The first spark arrived on a Thursday afternoon when I drove past the community center. It was a squat brick building I had seen 1,000 times but never entered. That day, as I stopped at the light, I saw a group of women walking out the doors, laughing, their voices spilling into the air like music. Something in me ached at the sight. I missed that sound laughter that came from belonging. I don't know what pushed me to do it, but I turned the wheel and pulled into the parking lot. My hands trembled as I pushed open the door, the smell of old wood and coffee instantly wrapping around me. The lobby was buzzing with life, people chatting, bulletin boards plastered with colorful flyers. My eyes landed on one in particular, cooking class beginners welcome. Thursday evenings, 6 p.m. Cooking had always been part of my life, but I had treated it as duty, not joy. The idea of joining a class at my age felt absurd, yet that flyer burned into my mind. Later that evening, as I sat in the quiet of my kitchen, staring once again at Richard's empty chair, I made a decision. I would go. The first class nearly broke me. I stood in the doorway, clutching my purse, feeling like an intruder. The room smelled of garlic and fresh herbs, laughter bouncing off the walls as people gathered around cutting boards. A woman named Marcy, the instructor, spotted me and smiled warmly. "Come on in," she said, her voice as welcoming as an embrace. I stumbled my way through that class, chopping uneven vegetables, nearly burning the sauce. But no one laughed at me. Instead, we laughed together. By the end of the evening, when I tasted the meal we had created, something shifted inside me. For the first time in months, I felt a flicker of pride, a flicker of joy. That flicker was enough to bring me back the following week. And the week after. Cooking became more than just preparing food, it became therapy. It reminded me of my mother's kitchen, of the warmth of home, of creating something from nothing. And slowly, those Thursday nights stitched little patches of light back into my darkened life. Encouraged, I signed up for a yoga class. The first time I unrolled the mat, I felt clumsy and out of place. My body was stiff, my balance shaky. But as I lay there, breathing deeply, listening to the calm instructions, I felt a peace I hadn't known in years. The grief didn't vanish, but for an hour, it loosened its grip on me. Yoga led me to meditation. I had always assumed my restless mind could never be still. But with practice, I began to find quiet in the chaos. I learned to sit with my pain instead of running from it, to acknowledge it, breathe through it, and let it move through me. Some days were harder than others, but even on the hardest days, meditation gave me a sense of control I hadn't felt since Richard died. Perhaps the most transformative step was joining the women's support circle. I almost didn't go. The idea of sitting in a room full of strangers, exposing my raw wounds, terrified me. But when I finally gathered the courage, I found something I hadn't expected: understanding. We sat in a circle of mismatched chairs, women of every age and background. Some were widows like me, others divorced, others simply lonely. Each woman carried her own story of heartbreak and survival. When it was my turn, my voice shook and tears streamed down my face as I spoke about Richard, about the silence of my house, about the crushing loneliness. I expected pity, but instead, I saw empathy, nods, gentle smiles, hands reaching out to hold mine. That night, for the first time since Richard's death, I didn't cry myself to sleep. Instead, I lay in bed with the memory of those women's faces, and I felt less alone. Weeks turned into months, and I began to notice small changes. I smiled more. I answered my children's calls with genuine warmth instead of forced cheer. I even called friends back, tentatively stepping into the social world I had abandoned. I bought a journal and started writing pages filled with thoughts I hadn't dared to speak aloud. Through all of this, I realized something profound. I wasn't waiting for someone else to save me anymore. I was saving myself. It wasn't easy. Some days the grief came crashing back, stronger than ever. There were mornings I still stared at Richard's chair and felt my heart crack all over again. But now, I had tools. I had cooking, yoga, meditation, and a circle of women who reminded me I wasn't alone. And perhaps most importantly, I had begun to rediscover me, the woman who laughed at burning garlic in class, the woman who could hold a yoga pose longer than she thought possible, the woman who dared to speak her pain and in doing so, found strength she never knew she had. For so long, I had defined myself by my roles: wife, mother, caretaker. But now, piece by piece, I was meeting the woman underneath all those roles. Julia Weston, a woman with a story still unfolding. And for the first time in years, I felt a question rise not from despair but from hope. What if the best part of my life is still ahead of me? When people speak about healing, they often describe it as a straight path, as though you simply decide to move forward and the pieces fall into place. But I learned the truth. Healing is not a line. It is a spiral. It is messy, looping back into old pain even as you climb toward something new. Some mornings, I still woke with grief pressing down like a heavy blanket. I still caught myself reaching for a second coffee mug out of habit, still expecting Richard's footsteps in the hall. But now, instead of letting those moments crush me, I learned to let them pass through me. They were reminders not of loss, but of love, of years I had been lucky enough to share with him. It was this shift, this quiet acceptance, that opened the door to something new. I started small. Cooking classes had already reignited a spark, but I wanted more. More connection, more challenge, more reason to step out of the house and out of my own head. When the community center announced a new series of workshops, I signed up for one without hesitation. Living well after loss, the room was filled with faces like mine, lined with sorrow but searching for hope. We shared our stories, cried together, sometimes laughed at the absurdity of life. The facilitator, a kind woman named June, told us something that stuck with me. Grief doesn't end, but joy can begin again alongside it. You don't choose one or the other, you carry both. That thought became my mantra. I began structuring my days around not just survival, but small joys. I joined a morning yoga group where I learned to stretch not just my body but also my patience with myself. Some days I toppled over in poses, and instead of feeling ashamed, I laughed along with the others. That laughter was medicine. Meditation became a daily ritual. I would light a candle in the quiet of my living room, sit cross-legged and breathe. At first, my thoughts darted everywhere: grocery lists, memories of Richard, worries about my children. But with practice, I learned to watch those thoughts drift past like clouds. They didn't own me anymore. One of the hardest parts of widowhood was the loneliness. I realized it wasn't just Richard's absence that haunted me, it was the absence of belonging. For so long, my identity had been tied to family, and without them close by, I felt invisible. So I forced myself to step back into the world. At first, it was terrifying. I signed up for a community volunteering program, tutoring children in reading after school. The first day, I almost turned back. But when I sat with a little girl struggling through a sentence, and saw her eyes light up as she finally understood, I felt something bloom inside me. Purpose. From there, I joined a book club at the library. The women in the group ranged from college students to retirees, but we bonded over stories. Each week, I walked home not just with a new book, but with laughter and connection echoing in my heart. I also discovered a local wellness group that met twice a week. We cooked healthy meals together, shared meditation practices, and even tried hiking on weekends. For the first time in years, I felt part of something bigger than myself. The more I leaned into these new activities, the more I realized something profound. I had spent decades caring for others, but rarely for myself. My happiness had always been tied to being a good wife, a good mother, a good daughter. Now, for the first time, I asked, what does happiness look like for me? The answer was surprisingly simple. It wasn't grand trips or extraordinary achievements. It was mornings spent stretching in yoga, afternoons filled with the smell of homemade bread, evenings laughing with new friends. It was choosing to fill my days with things that made my soul lighter. I stopped apologizing for my needs. When my children called, I spoke honestly. I miss you, but I'm doing okay. I found things that make me happy. Instead of pity, I heard pride in their voices. My daughter once said, "Mom, I think you're stronger than you've ever been." That sentence carried me for weeks. Of course, it wasn't all smooth. There were setbacks, days when grief pulled me back under. Anniversaries were the hardest. Richard's birthday, our wedding date, the day he died. On those days, I let myself cry. I visited his grave, brought flowers, whispered updates about the children. But then I returned home, lit a candle, and reminded myself, grief is love with nowhere to go. And I still had so much love to give to myself, to my community, to life itself. One winter evening, during a meditation session, I felt something shift deep inside me. I realized I wasn't just surviving anymore. I was creating a life. Not the life I had planned, but a life worth living nonetheless. By the time spring came, I was a different woman. Not because the pain had disappeared, but because I had learned to live alongside it. My days had rhythm again. Mornings in yoga, Afternoons volunteering, evenings spent with books or new recipes. I joined a local community garden, and there, with dirt under my nails and sun on my face, I felt a joy I hadn't known since childhood. Watching tiny seedlings grow into vibrant plants mirrored my own journey. I was growing too. I made friends who became like family. We shared meals, celebrated birthdays, and sat with each other in silence when words weren't enough. These bonds reminded me that life, even when shattered, could still be rebuilt. One day, after a long yoga session, I sat on the porch with a cup of tea and realized something. I wasn't afraid of the future anymore. For so long, I had feared the years ahead, imagining them as endless stretches of loneliness. But now, I saw them as open pages. I didn't know what the story would hold, but for the first time, I was excited to write it. If there is one truth my journey has taught me, it is this: you are never too old to broken, or too lost to begin again. At 56, I thought my story was over. But what I've discovered is that endings are only beginnings in disguise. Richard will always be part of me. My children will always hold pieces of my heart. But now, I also hold myself. And that is enough. As I look back on those dark months after Richard's death, I see now that they were not the end of me. They were the breaking that allowed me to rebuild stronger, freer, and more myself than I had ever been. And as I step into this new chapter, I no longer ask what now, with despair. I ask it with hope, with curiosity, with the quiet thrill of a woman who has learned to live not for the expectations of others, but for the joy of simply being alive.